How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another edition of the Stupid Questions podcast. Today on the pod, we're going to be talking with John Mollura. Mollura, I think is how you say his name. I apologize. He spent 15 years leading mission critical field testing and supporting NASA and elite U.S. military units where clear thinking, trusted teams, and decision actions were just essential. So if you don't know what that means, he's a smart guy teaching smart people how to do smart things. That's really what it comes down to. Engineering background, involved in military, obviously, and NASA, and now he's doing consulting / coaching for high performers all around the world, I would believe. So, yeah, great guy, great conversation. I do apologize. We recorded for 20 minutes before I actually hit record. So that was a huge flub up on my end, but I think still it's a really wonderful conversation, and we kind of tie stuff in and reference things in a way that you guys can still understand. So John has a book coming out. Make sure to check out the show notes if you are interested in his stuff. He's definitely a high-performing thinker. I'm probably going to need to get a coach like this before too long in some respects, because talking to people like him, I realize my deficits, and it's not a bad thing. So it's bad if you don't make changes. It's bad if I don't make changes. So that's that. Thank you so much for being here. If you are here still listening to this, jump into starting the pod, just want to ask if you could check out the link in the show notes and description to like, comment, subscribe, do all the things, sign up for our newsletter. Helps continue to grow the pod. I've talked for long enough. Thank you so much for being here, and want to introduce you now to John Mollura. I just realized that this wasn't recording until now, but I'm so sorry. I have no idea how that happened. Anyway, we'll still
ask you. Yeah, I was going to ask you.
They changed the UI, and I swear I hit record, and then I just looked up and I was like, why isn't it running? So
Okay.
Yeah, we'll still keep going, and it's okay. I can, when I do the intro, I'll give it a little of the prior context, but this is actually really good because it gives me a lot of depth for how to ask some future questions. For those who are just, I guess everyone's just jumping in, I'll just say John's a deep guy, so I'm going to ask some very deep questions. We went over how you lost your friend. That was a huge, just I guess, shift and turning point in your life from being an engineer for many years, making good money, traveling around the world. It was exhausting. You wanted to set a better example for your children. You learned that you aren't necessarily a liability for the way that your brain works, and you didn't want to operate from a place of fear. And so that's kind of where we are in the story. Again, so sorry.
It's all right.
But there's a number of things that I want to touch on, because you talked about religion. You talked about like how you realized that there's something deeper there. And you talked about this experience, particularly with, feeling a warm sensation come over you when you said the serenity prayer, particularly about the end. Can you say that line with the wisdom?
Yeah, so the last line of the serenity prayer, which is, the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah, the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
And that washed over you. That made me think of a particular experience I want to share, and then kind of follow up with a question. When I was in college, so I don't know if you knew this, I lost my father when I was 16, but in college is when I got to a place when I was like 21, and, my dad, it was complicated. He took his own life. The listeners know this story. But I was in college and went to go take a shower, and it was like this place when I finally realized, like, I had kind of been searching for a dad to fill that seat for so many different things, for how to be a man, whatever. You're in college, you're going through all these changes. And I realized, like, okay, well, the only father that really matters, I guess, is like a heavenly father. And I just prayed. It was on Father's Day. And a lot of, there's a lot of topic around that. And I asked, like, God, will you take that spot? And I had a very similar experience that you talked about with like the washing over. And that's when I realized, I think for like the first real time where faith became something that was tangible. I never had a problem believing. I knew God was there. I'd seen miracles externally happen about me, but that's that one thing that happened. So that's when you said that, it reminded me of that. But for you, as you step into that like new realm of like, okay, this is my own real thing. I mean, yeah, I guess, how did that start to change the way that you just operated from as a husband, as a father, as a working man, like trying to find your worth and value? You talked about fear, like stepping away from fear. What did that start to do for you?
Yeah, that moment, ironically, that happened to me also in a bathroom, which I knew none of that.
Really?
Yeah, exactly. I was getting ready to get in the shower. So yeah, I didn't know any of that backstory on you. Crazy how God works, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
So it started slowly, and it started with me just feeling this tug in my heart. I mean, because we're going back, 15 plus years now at this point. It started with like a tug in my heart of like, dude, you need to start getting a handle on how you react to people, especially people that you feel like maybe are challenging your intelligence, your sense of worth, your work ethic, like whatever story you are. It's like you need to start getting a handle on that. So I started taking notice when, like, in meetings at work, I would just react to people like completely out of, the realm of the response that was required. Like if I felt like someone was challenging an idea I had, or a test we had done, or a report we'd written, or a conclusion I'd drawn, like I would take it as like a personal attack. When what it was in hindsight was I felt like they were attacking my worth, and I already didn't believe I should be there, working in the space program. So I would defend it with like very pointed, very sharp remarks that were completely unwarranted. But at that point in my life, that's where I developed my worth from. So I was like, I'm gonna cut the legs out from these people emotionally and shut them down. And I was able to do that because one of my greatest skills now as like a coach and a speaker is being able to connect with people and just kind of see behind the veil of what makes them tick. Whereas now I use that to connect with people. But back then I was kind of like Darth Vader with the Force. Yep. I'd be able to be like, oh, this is gonna get Seth, so I'm gonna shut him down right away. That's the first thing that I noticed started changing. I didn't react.
Wow.
I would respond. And that's when I really started seeing a shift happen in my life. And then obviously that carried through into my personal life as a husband, as a father, as a son, friend.
How old were you when the shower or almost shower experience?
Yeah, so that happened in the summer of 2009. So that would have been right before I turned 32.
So interesting because I'll be 30. Well, I'll be 33 or 34. I think I'm going to be 34.
Yeah, we don't keep track anymore.
Yeah, I'm going to be 34 in a month. But it's so interesting because I feel like 2 years ago, the way you're explaining like how to see behind the veil and then kind of use that as ammunition. I'm actually embarrassed to say this, but I'm going to say it because I think everybody should hear it. And I think a lot of men and women too, I guess, struggle with it. But that ability usually comes from like you experience something and like you have an intuition, you can see people, understand them, and then there's a positive and negative of that. The negative of that, at least for me, is like like you're saying, you can use that as a cutthroat way to get to someone and make them lose their cool. And I valued for a long time the ability to basically be a lawyer or an argumentator to, cut you down, make you lose your stuff mentally because I could, use a couple placed words to have you just explode. Really use that against my mom. Well, I got married and I realized I had been doing that to my wife, man, and a lot. I've been married for going on 10 years next June, and any person can only deal with that so much. And me and my wife have had some conversations now, a decade in, where she's like, I cannot do this. And, I think 5 years ago, when she would have said something like that, it probably would have just completely derailed me and, going to what you're talking about, the self-worth, the liability. I feel like you're not attacking the thing I'm doing, but you're attacking me as an individual. Being able to parse and separate what she's saying or what anyone is saying and like have that not be tied to who you are as an individual is such a crazy, hard lesson to learn. Yeah. But for so long, I was like doing that with my wife, and I recognized it just through some time in the Word, some really good mentors in my life. But I don't know if there's a way to teach that to someone without almost like that lesson of learning, without almost being to the edge of throwing your life off a cliff and those you love off that cliff.
Yeah. Yeah. And as someone who has walked with people, you can see it plain as day. Like, this is what they're doing. And until they're ready to receive that message, like, there's really nothing you can do other than like model the way it should be and offer gentle guidance. Because I know when I wasn't ready to receive that message, I actually had a coworker, God bless him, try to step in when I was very early in my engineering career and be like, hey man, I know you feel like the stakes are really high, but you can't react like that to people in meetings. And I remember, dude, I was so mad at that guy, and I made it my mission to, whenever I was in a meeting with that dude, to just shut him down.
Jeez.
And like was very successful at it. And I was so good at what I did that people would put up with me.
Mm.
Right. And again, like a couple years after that, I had my direct supervisor pull me in his office. He's like, dude, he's like, you're very talented at what we do here. He's like, but people aren't going to want to work with you. And I remember I was so mad. Like I went home and like just had a couple beers and like just, complained to my wife, like, you believe he said this to me? What a jerk.
Mm.
And I didn't use those words.
Yeah.
And
Pre-salvation experience.
It was, yeah, totally. But fast forward a couple years after I started doing that work and, Holy Spirit, came into my heart. That same guy that originally said stuff to you that I said I made it my mission to like shut him down. We were in a meeting together. And like I'd really been working on not reacting to people and like keeping my cool and not taking it as an attack on my worth. And we were in a meeting together. And I've been working on this for a while, and I went back, sat at my desk, and he came by. He said, hey, man, can I talk to you? And I saw him, and, like, my stomach dropped. I'm like, oh, no. He's going to tell me, like, what's wrong with you? He's going to give me the same speech. And I wanted to be like, I had my whole retort ready, like, dude, I've really been working on it. Cut me a break. He goes, what's up with you? I was like, what do you mean? He said, I just watched someone basically tear your stuff apart that you've been working on, and you just took it as feedback and didn't bite his head off. He's like, what's up with you? He's like, the old John would have like crucified that guy.
Mm.
And I told him what happened. He's like, man, he's like, well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And like, that was such life spoken into me. Like he didn't have to stop by. And like, of all the people, like it was him. I'm like, oh my gosh, like what I'm doing is actually working, because that's the trouble is when you're putting work in on something, you don't see the fruits of your labor, especially like deep work in yourself, and you don't see the fruits of the labor right away. It can be really disheartening. So
Yeah.
I'll always remember him taking the moment to just kind of speak life into me, and is like, it is happening. Keep going. Don't let your natural impatience take over.
Mm. So two things. Words are so amazing. One of the things I've been so just, moved by is this concept in the beginning. God, created everything with his mouth, basically, or his speaking words into existence. So just first of all, imagining what that sounds like, the vibrations of his voice, shaking atoms to bring them together, to separate them, whatever. And then he creates man, gives us that literal same breath that then goes into our lungs that we are enabled to give life, literally, I think, and cut it down. Because when we say stuff to people, the chemical process, stress and cortisol literally kills them. So that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But from a position of leadership, I've oftentimes, like I grew up, start getting in the business world in college, and it was like very much Gary V and what you permit, you promote, and, hiring is guessing, firing is knowing, move quick, cut people down. And like, there's some good and bad to that. But I realized after actually getting into like the workplace in different fractional roles and leadership positions, it's like, I would love to just be able to, just fire that person. They're doing something wrong interpersonally, let them go. So for you, like now that you've gone through this, you've been that person who has been really good at their job, doesn't treat people great. People will put up with that because there is a balance to be had. But ideally, everyone is, nice and perfect. From a leadership perspective, how do you coach someone in a leadership perspective who is maybe dealing with a person like that? When do you let them go? Do you immediately let them go? Is permitting this to happen, you're promoting it? How do you offer grace? What does that look like? How should you deal with those people?
Yeah, wow. So there are so many layers and nuances to that. And let me be very clear. Like, I might have been a jerk, but like, I was never like threatening people. Like there are some things that like there should be zero tolerance for. Like if there's someone like threatening like violence, like
sure,
you got to go. Attacks on race, creed, color, what all those kind of things, like that kind of stuff can't stand. Yeah, that kind of stuff can't stand. So those are kind of the quote unquote easy calls. Where it gets really difficult is like for someone like me who just is kind of a jackass, right? Doesn't say anything that like HR can be like, dude, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then it becomes a matter of as a leader, whether you're dealing with someone like I used to be or just anybody, as a leader, one of the most important things we need to realize is communication is not just about getting your point across. True communication is recognizing how to communicate your point and have it land with that specific person you're talking to. Because people receive messages differently. Like there are some people like that I could be like, hey, Dave, we got 9 steps here. You missed number 4, fix it next time. And they would appreciate that straightforward communication, be like, got it, boss, and cool. As you can imagine, there are some people that if you said that to, they would be like a puddle on the floor just crying for like 3 weeks and like totally, because that's not how they receive messages. So as a leader, we need to make sure we have a good understanding of how they receive messages. So one of the tools I use is, the Enneagram, which are 9 different communication archetypes. Not pentagram. This isn't witchcraft, right? This is just about recognizing.
There's no blood or goat sacrifice.
No sacrifice required. Other than your time to spend the time learning this, which if you're a leader and really intent on having your message land with people, and when I say leader, a lot of people are like, well, I'm not a leader. I don't have a team at work. I'm like, well, you're a leader in your home. You're a leader in your place of faith. Maybe you're a leader in your community. If you talk to anybody and try to get your point across, you're a leader in some capacity. So if you want to be effective at it, make sure to know how you have your message communicated to people. So like the Enneagram is very powerful because it teaches you to recognize certain tendencies people have. And we talked a lot about being able to read people is a big skill. So if you can read someone and realize, okay, this is probably how the message is best going to land with them, let me just adjust how I'm delivering this message. And it's not a matter of being inauthentic, right? You're communicating the same message. You're just doing it in a way that's going to land for that person. So for a leader that's operating with someone who maybe needs to be reined in a little bit like I did, that's the first step is like, okay, how can I communicate this best? Where can I communicate this best to this person? Because in front of a room full of people, probably not a good idea, right? Praise in public, correct in private kind of thing. So that's the advice I would give is figure out how best the message could land with this person.
Yeah, and I think what a piece of this puzzle that you're talking about is like discretion, which honestly, I don't think I learned what discretion is. It's been less than a year, if I'm being completely honest. I used to be in the camp of the belief that, well, if it's true and I'm saying it and it hurts your feelings, whose problem is that? It's not my problem. And really that came from a place of I was so overwhelmed with the thought of what I'm doing influencing someone else's emotions, given my father taking his own life, having a fight with him the morning that I saw him the last time.
Wow.
Not going to see him. So like, and then my mother, and I love my mother, I don't say this in a way to throw her down, but it was like this modus of operandi where, we're going to go see dad and whatever we do will affect him. So put on a happy face. And so it was ingrained in me that whatever I show influences you and I could possibly be responsible for how you react.
Wow.
And there's nuance there because there is a level of influence that you have on someone. If they're in a dark place, you can definitely make it seem darker. The decision is on them. So being able to figure that out was like super difficult. And literally like maybe 8 months ago, a family member who I trust very much on my wife's side, we were talking about something. It's her uncle. And he's like, honestly, Seth, like you do great in all these ways. And he really understands how to land something with me. And I typically do relatively well if I trust you and respect you with the direct. And he was just saying, I don't think you know what discretion is. And my first reaction was, well, what are you talking about? I know exactly what discretion is, but I don't want to, I really what it came down to is I did not want to own that I could influence people. It was just more comfortable to say it's not my problem. But now I'm realizing with my wife, with my daughter who's 6 months even, like my friends, my working environment, my coaching relationships in sport, discretion is so hard for me to understand. And I don't think it's necessarily easy for anyone, but some people would have it more naturally. But how do you think it is if you realize you have a lack in discretion? I'm asking selfishly now, how do you develop discretion?
Yeah, so let's pull back and talk about the bigger concept here that I really want to celebrate you for is shifting out of autopilot and into awareness, right? Because autopilot is just, you're welcome. Autopilot is just kind of how we go about things. And this is such a powerful thing. Like I actually have a masterclass on this. I call it the navigators. And it's about, if you think of a cross like this, up and down is autopilot and awareness, and then left to right is judgment and curiosity. And at the intersection of each of those four quadrants is what I call a navigator. And these are things that we all have inside of us. So I'll go through them real quick, because if you can realize who's navigating, who's stepping in the cockpit and kind of calling the shots, that's really powerful, because then you can, kind of switch into the fourth navigator, which is the one that kind of keeps you going where you want to go. So when you're in awareness, but you're judgmental, like that's where the critic lives, right? The critic's just going to try to beat you up. When you're on autopilot and in judgment, that's when you can have like that blamer mentality where, it's everybody else's problem. Everybody's doing this. My business would be successful if the market would do this, or this person would have called me back. That's where you surrender your agency, right? With like a blaming mentality. When you're in autopilot and curious, that's what I call the drifter. That's the shiny object person.
Mm-hmm. Oh, look,
that's just kind of, yeah, exactly. Or, ooh, that's going to solve my problem. Let me abandon this other thing that was supposed to solve all my problems before and go on to the next one. So those are the three navigators that can kind of get you stuck. The navigator that lives at the intersection of awareness and curiosity, I call the seeker. And that's the one that I always encourage people to shift into for when you realize like, hey, maybe I do have trouble with discretion. Like I'm aware of that. It'd be very easy to be like, I'm aware that my discretion isn't where it needs to be, and judge yourself on it. And then the critic just beats you up. So the key is be like, all right, I'm aware of discretion and I love what you did. You're like, how can we get better at it? And one of the best tools I found, like I said, is the Enneagram. And there's a book, it's actually behind me. It's called The Road Back to You by Ian Morgan Crone. And he's a retired pastor, and he's just cheeky enough to appeal to my sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
But he looks at it with the undercurrent of faith, but he steps through the 9 different archetypes of communication in there, whether, it's someone who is very, like the peacemaker who just kind of agrees with everything. It's got a light side and a shadow side to that. Then you got the people that can start that are very blunt and can start an argument in a house by themselves. What are the benefits to that? What are the shadow sides of that? And it kind of gives these traits for these 9 different archetypes, where you can start to be like, okay, that person's probably a number 6. They're going to really value safety and security in this conversation. So I'm going to try to tie everything back to that, because that's going to help it land well with this person. But that person's a type 2. They really value service. So I'm going to tie everything back to how this is going to better everybody else. So the Enneagram is a tremendous resource to begin to understand how you receive messages, right? But then also to start to pick out traits for other people. Again, not to just categorize everybody. No one's a perfect category of anything, but it just gives you a way to kind of frame the delivery of the messages.
Yeah, good stuff. I had someone recently ask me what my Enneagram was. I was like, I don't know. I did what was the other ones? The Myers-Briggs. Is that what it was? ENP, whatever, all of those different letters. Maybe I'll have to try the Enneagram one, because it does seem, I am curious of it. But yeah, it's interesting learning how to, I don't know. It always fascinates me with people and their history and the things that they've gone through, and how you could have 2 people who have gone through very similar background, but then someone ends up deciding just way out here in left field, crazy life decisions, near-death experiences almost constantly. And then someone else who, like, they made the choice, I guess, or small choices that compounded over time to kind of like figure out and better themselves. But even though I kind of know like what things need to relatively, I guess, happen to get to one place or the other. How do I say this without sounding like a just jerk? But like, I look at my life and I look at other people who are similar things, and I'm like, well, how did I get lucky enough to like be pushed by the right people or guided in that direction? Because some people don't have the influences that I had. I didn't grow up in a faith-believing community, albeit some of them were a little crazy. Like, some people just don't get that. So I'm like, God, how do you judge those people? Because I cannot. It's so confusing to me. Yeah. Just a thought.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said it. It's like, God, how do you judge those people? Well, that's the only one who really gets to, right? And It's one of those things. It's life. It's like, what do you have control over? It's like your choices, right? And the moment we realize that we have a choice, and maybe you don't have the frame of view or the support that other people do, but when it comes down to it, you still have a choice with how you react or how you respond. And reactions are involuntary. Responses have some discernment. So that's a muscle that we can all work on to strengthen, is our muscle to respond to things, to respond with intention, with discernment on stuff, with discretion, because it's so easy, especially in today's world where it's like now to just react instead of just like collecting our thoughts and being like, wait a minute, how best can I respond to this situation? And what I always tell people is that I always say, ask yourself, when something happens, what's my 1%? When something happens, say, what's my 1%? And what that means is we're never entirely blameless. And I'm talking about adults here. I'm not talking about when things happen to kids. I'm talking about as adults, we are never entirely blameless. And that pause of interrupting, and when we can get into like a blamer mentality and say, wait a minute, what's my 1%? Because I always say, you're responsible for whatever happens somewhere between 1% and 99%. Somewhere in the middle, that's what you have to pay the piper, that you contributed to this. And it might not be a choice you made recently. It might be a cascading effect that put you where you are. But when we can recognize that we're not blameless, that's not meant to make you feel bad about yourself. It's actually empowering, because now you realize, okay, wait a minute. Life's not just happening to me willy-nilly. I have some say in what happens here. That's actually empowering when you realize that you have some say.
Oh, it's a tremendous amount of power. Yeah. That, and yeah, the choices you make, the words you speak, because they all reflect what's going on at a deeper level. So that leads me to this question for you.
Yeah.
And I'll just preface this with saying, you are a particularly hard person for me to ask questions to, because nothing against past guests, but people who are less developed, honestly, mentally, physically, spiritually, but especially like mentally and spiritually, you can ask these questions and they elicit, I don't know, not more interesting responses, but it's just easier to get somewhere that you think like, oh, I can get them to say this, and then that'll open up another piece of conversation. But you're particularly hard because I feel like you've developed so well, so it's harder for me, I guess, is what I'm saying.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah.
That I didn't even intend it as.
Yeah, I hope it's a compliment.
It is. I'm going to put that on my resume. Very hard to ask questions too.
Yeah. But, we're talking about, now I lost my train of thought. I guess I'll go to this one. With the liability, like when you were, I don't know, a few years ago, like you viewed yourself as a liability, that voice, that inner critic, you said before we started recording officially, you were telling me about, it's very nature driven, your personality to like say yes to things, find opportunities, and be driven in that way. I'm wondering, with the liability side, how you viewed yourself. Was that more nature? Was that more nurture? And then my question I was going to ask too is, do you spend more time in your head or your heart?
The belief that the way I naturally went through life was a liability was definitely nurture. Definitely nurture. And, there was a certain level of gift in that. Was you can't just say yes to everything and just go off the rails without any kind of discernment. So it was very much a nurture thing, where I realized where I started to feel like I'm completely a liability for the way I am. Whereas the growth that happened was, it can be a liability if not held in check. And that's the same with anything. You can, a vehicle is a liability if it's not held in check. If you drive a Ferrari down the road at 180 miles an hour drunk, that's going to end badly for you and a lot of other people potentially, right? But if you drive a Ferrari on a racetrack and you're all geared up and you're trained, cool. Now you can harness that power. And that's probably one of the biggest lessons I've recently been learning about me, is I need to harness that ability to just kind of say, well, let's just let it fly and go.
Well said.
Thank you.
So with that being said, with the way that you operate now, like you don't view yourself as that, you've got all these tools and life lessons and things you've learned. Do you operate more from a place of like in your head or more for in your heart, you think?
Can you expand on that by what you mean by in your head or in your heart? I think I know what
Yeah,
you mean, but
so like head meaning more analytical, process driven, heart being more empathetic, more leaning into the person and the individual, or just like the emotional context of the situation. Do you think that you have a good balance? Do you lean one way or the other? I don't even know if there's a right or wrong way to do it. What do you think?
to quote the late great Johnny Cash, I walk the line, right?
Mm-hmm.
I really try to walk the line between the head and the heart because I used to be very heart driven, and that would end me up in situations like the story I told you about leaving engineering to turn my side hustle photography into a full-time gig was a very good example of how I led too much with my heart. What I should have done is listen to my heart that something wasn't right and something needed to change, and then check in with the left side of my brain, the logic, the head part, and be like, all right, well, let's craft an appropriate runway for this to make it happen. So you're honoring your heart, but you're still putting enough, checks and discernment in that you're not going to completely, crash the plane or go off the rails.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the reason I asked that is because, in my generation growing up was like the Disney world, and it's very heavily focused on follow your heart. And I mean, the Bible says like the heart is deceitful above all things, like and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So there's that aspect of it. But even if you don't sit in that camp of like a religious background, I just don't understand how that could be one of like the sore motivating factors for how you operate in the world. Because like for me, I mean, man, if I followed my heart all the time, and I, like you said, I think it's a sign of like immaturity or a place of like showing, oh, something's off. But to be able to kind of control that with the other side of the brain, the more analytical, create a runway response is a lot more difficult. But it's fascinating because in our world, if you want to get into the conspiracy world side of things, it's like you can control people with fear. And if you want to create fear, you put them in a place where you only follow your heart, or to better, easier say it, follow your emotions. Because if I can control your emotions, I can somewhat control you and influence your decisions.
For sure. Yeah, my pastor has a thing that he says, emotions are tremendous indicators, but they're terrible navigators, right? Your emotions and your feelings are very important to let you know when something's up, right? They're great indicators to be like, hey, pay attention. It's like a warning light on the dashboard. But you can't let those feelings jump in and dictate where you're going to go. So if we can kind of tap into that and realize, okay, when we have something come up, make us feel a certain way, that's an opportunity again to be aware and engage curiosity. Be like, all right, what's this saying? What do I think this is saying about me? What's it saying about the other person? What am I feeling like I should do? How can I kind of step through that? And that's what a lot of my coaching business is like working with people that are in leadership roles where there's a gap between what they feel they should be doing and like what they're actually doing. And that gap creates a lot of static for them, a lot of turmoil. So I really help them sift through what's the right signal actually coming out of that to take the next right action on.
Before you made the move, like we're leaving corporate America, I'm no longer an engineer, finding your way into your consulting firm. How do I say your last name? Mollura?
Mollura. Yep.
Mollura Consulting, starting Elite Action, which I think is what we're talking about now with the coaching. What did it take for you to kind of realize this is the direction that you wanted to go, I guess? Because there are some overlaps with engineering for sure, I would say. But yeah, curious to know how you landed in that direction.
Yeah, again, going back to what we were talking about before I pushed record, where I kind of Forrest Gumped through life. After I left engineering and started doing photography full time, I did commercial photography. So like headshots, product photography, things for like Fortune 500 companies for their websites, like those kind of things, which the engineering background, especially what I did, which was verifying requirements, dovetailed very nicely because, I don't like to speak in absolutes, so I'll say a lot of people in the creative fields aren't known for their rigor with details, right? So when a Fortune 500 company would hire me to do like a website photo shoot, they would give me this tons of requirements. Like we need this spec, we need these shots, all the things. Well, cool. my engineering background, I could translate that and run a checklist and do the creative photography part of it, but then also satisfy their bajillion requirements. And they really appreciated that. So that enabled me to be, successful in that realm. And then after COVID happened, I saw such a change in people in their confidence getting in front of the camera, like even for like a commercial shoot for like headshots or models, like things were just different. So I started leaning into all the coaching and mentoring that I had over the years to get them in front of the camera. And then I realized like, hey, I actually kind of enjoy this, because I've had a coach pretty much consistently in one form or another for the past 17 years, or I'm sorry, 14 years. And I was like, I really enjoy this. So then I started getting more comfortable leading people and, through some various groups I was a part of. And I was like, I should lean into this because I saw a big deficit in how men were showing up in the world. And my initial coaching program was a men's coaching program. And then like their wives and girlfriends or women in the community that kind of followed my work were like, hey, can we get in on this? And I was like, I said to my wife, I'm like, I don't know what to do. There's like girls asking me to do stuff. And she like kind of laughed at me. She's like, so? I'm like, well, I'm not a girl. She's like, yeah, but you've been married for like 20 years, dude. And like, you're raising two, healthy teenage girls. You probably are more qualified than you're giving yourself credit for. So again, my wife spoke life into me, and sometimes we need to trust our cheerleaders, right? We need to trust those people that are trusted advisors in our life. When they tell us we're good enough, well, maybe we should believe them and not deflect it or redirect it with some kind of snide comment, right? Which I'm very good at.
Yeah, most people are. Accepting affirmations is such a skill to learn, not to be proud and prideful. There's a difference, but yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just a matter of like smiling, saying thank you, and smiling again when someone says something nice. Like I built a whole keynote around that. That's one of my most popular keynotes, is how to accept the compliment. But anyway, I digress. So as I started feeling drawn towards coaching more, and I'd been doing commercial photography at that point for like 7, 8 years, the photography business started just decreasing. But then like all these opportunities started opening up for me to speak and coach. And I said to one of my mentors, I was like, dude, I don't know what's going on. Like I can't get anything to work in my photography. Like I was so focused on the decrease, which, okay, that's my livelihood, like kind of a big deal. And he, Pastor Ken is such a wise dude, and I always knew I was in for it. He'd kind of put his glasses up on top of his head and start steepling his fingers. And I'm like, oh boy, here comes some wisdom. Yeah. And he'd be like, John, do you ever consider the fact that maybe God's drawing back that faucet of what you were doing and opening up all these other influxes of what you feel like you should be doing, so you actually pay attention and do it? And I was like, wow, that's brilliant. I can look back on my life and see that has happened numerous times. Thank you, Pastor Ken. So that's when I really started leaning into the coaching, to the point where just a couple weeks ago, I did my last photo shoot. I just sold all of my commercial photography gear like 3 days ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and like I said, it was a years long fade. And I really took those lessons learned when I just bailed on engineering and started doing photography to build a runway out for speaking and coaching. So like I was still pursuing photography. It's just, it was drying up. AI changed that landscape tremendously for commercial photography. So I was like, looking back, I'm like, hey, I actually did it right and followed my own lessons learned. High five. Good job, John.
Yeah, good work. Yeah, no, it's always amazing looking at people's trajectory and growth path with vocation, what they want to do in the future, because it's so rare that I've ever talked to someone and they have just like a perfect through line from high school, college. Now they're doing what they went to college for, and then they get the house, the kids. Okay, and that's life. But so times it's like so out of left field or right field what you would have thought when you were a kid. So that's kind of a question I want to ask you. When you were like a young kid, if someone would have asked, John, what do you want to be when you grow up? Were you a typical, I want to be a firefighter, or what kind of kid were you?
I want to be, a fighter pilot or special forces in the military. Like, I think until I was probably like 8 or 9, all I wore was camouflage.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And unfortunately, no branch of the military said I could serve. I was born with pretty severe club foot on my right leg. So that immediately disqualified me from, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard, which I was crestfallen about when I found that out in high school. So that's what I always wanted to do, and then I couldn't do it. So people ask me how I wound up in engineering. I'm like, I don't know. I think a guidance counselor in high school probably told me, you're good at math and science, you should do engineering. And I had no other plans. So I was like, all right, that's cool. I'll just do that. So that was obviously a bummer. And like I'm almost 50 years old and I still regret not being able to serve in that capacity. But yeah, oh yeah, for sure. But what that ended up doing was when I was in engineering, I had the opportunity to serve the warfighters directly. So a lot of the testing we ran was equipment to keep, fighter pilots and special forces operators safe. So I got to work adjacent to all those people that I always wanted to be doing that job. So it was kind of like, well, I can't do that job, but at least I can serve them and make sure that the people that are keeping me safe can come home safely.
How do you think your life would have turned out differently, or would it have had you not had the ailment that would have allowed you to go in and do the service?
Yeah, I mean, this is very much a sliding doors kind of question, right? To quote that movie from the 90s. Yeah, I really don't know. I probably would have done very well had I found the correct kind of group to be with. Like, I probably would not have been cut out for the very much rank and file, yes sir, no sir, do exactly what you said. Like, that's not my personality. So if I had been able to find myself in a group that kind of valued autonomy a little more than traditional military, I probably would have been very successful at it.
Yeah, special forces or something.
Yeah, because a lot of those people that I do work with them now outside of the engineering world, and I'm like, oh yeah, these are my people. Yeah, these are my people. They just don't have a bad foot.
Sheesh, that's tough, man. Because to say that you have a regret or like you wish something would have been differently, there's something there that you wish could be fulfilled. Is it just the service of the country? Like, what is it, the heart root of that? Forgive me for prying.
Well, that's what we're here for, man. I think what a lot of it is being able to prove that I can do difficult things. Like, I just really like doing that. I like being able to say, like, I'm an elite performer. And that's not to say I like being elitist. That's saying you're better than everybody. When you say that you're elite, that means that you just hold yourself to an extremely high standard that most people don't. So I think that's where a lot of that comes from.
Do you feel good enough, like that do you think you'll be able to satiate that desire is tied to that regret through what you're doing now, or will there always be something that you're not able to fully kind of grab at and be like, okay, I did that thing?
I don't think it detracts from what I do. I mean, but the fact that it's something I always had my heart set on but wasn't able to do, it's like, yeah, I mean, there will be a regret, but there's a difference between it being a regret that like I just couldn't do it, like I wasn't allowed to, as to never trying. Right? Like that's different. Like there's a song that I love by a rock band called The Struts, and it's called Could Have Been Me. And there's a verse in there that whenever something challenging comes up, or like I don't want to do it, or like I don't want to do the hard thing, I just remember the line from that song, and it says, I never want to say that could have been me. Like, I never have to say when I'm sitting on a rocking chair in my 80s, you know what, I was a really good photographer. National Geographic featured my stuff once. I think I probably could have made a job at that. I don't have to say that. I can be like, I did it. It didn't work out like the way I wanted it to, but I did it. Like, I never have to say it could have been me. Like, I know, because one good test is worth 1,000 opinions.
Yeah, one good test is worth 1,000 opinions. Well said. I think I'll have to quote that one.
That's from my mentor, Skip, my engineering mentor.
Nice. That's amazing. Yeah. So I want to ask a question about your family, particularly your children, because you have three.
Yeah, three.
What is the greatest, I guess, leadership lesson? It doesn't have to necessarily be tied to leadership, but you've learned from your children?
Being able to, I think, let them figure it out on their own is a much bigger gift than stepping with them through every step of the process, and letting them know that you're there as backup and counsel, but you're not there to solve the problem, because, intellectually it can be like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But it's very different when you're watching someone you love and care about struggle with something and know that you could fix it. But that's not going to be the best way to actually serve them in the long run.
Yeah. How many times did you have to fail at that before you kind of feel like I'm successful at doing this with my kids?
Well, successful obviously doesn't mean perfection. Some days you get it more right than others.
Yeah.
But I think I always kind of, like I said, knew that intellectually. But when they started getting older and like, you couldn't solve a problem with like just picking them up or putting a blanket on them, that's when I think like I really just wanted to like solve problems, especially like if it were relationship issues with like a teacher maybe that based on what my child told me wasn't treating them fairly, or like peers that were treating them fairly. Like there were times where like I just felt like anger. I'm like, I want to rip this person's head off. Right? Like Papa Bear came out. And instead it was like, to quote the theologian Ice Cube, I had to chickadee check myself before I wickety wrecked myself and get a handle on myself. You probably don't get Ice Cube quoted a lot on your show. So
I think that's the first mention
I'm
of
glad
Ice
I
Cube.
could bring that to you.
Yeah.
But that was probably a very hard thing for me, because I would feel like the old John come up. It's like I could say some things and put this person in their place like right now. And it's like, no, that's not the best thing to do for so many reasons. That's also not the way, I wanted to model for my kids.
That's going to be, I think, the central hardest thing for me, because I used to have this belief in high school when I first started playing soccer and was obsessed with it. I was like, if there was just 12 of me, we'd be the perfect team. Like the biggest lie that anyone full of pride, especially a young guy, could believe. But then that led into, so I was really fortunate. I have two younger sisters. One's 4 years younger, one's 12 years younger. We adopted her. She's my cousin by blood. But with that 12-year age gap, watching her walk through some of the developmental years, teaching my 4-year younger sister how to ride a bike versus my 12-year younger, the 4 years difference is like I pushed her down a hill, hey, good luck. And then the 12-year difference, it was just, I was so obsessed with, I don't know, like I actually believed she couldn't do it without me. Like you have to pedal and pedal. And then I realized that was carrying as I got older. I was like, how do I drop this mentality and belief? Because it becomes over micromanaging and it suffocates people. And now that I'm, I have my first daughter, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to really continue to, on your scale, like curious and aware, like get into that quadrant, because my goodness, I can only imagine it's so much harder with a child whose cry, for example, you're so tied to, I need to solve this. Yeah. So hard.
Yeah. And I mean, so our oldest is leaving for college, and like we're dropping her off 48 hours from right now.
Are you going to cry?
I'm going to try not to cry right now. I'll shoot you straight, man. But with something like that is when they would cry, like when they're young, like how old did you say your child is? 6 months?
6 months and a couple weeks.
Yeah. Like you're responsible. So like you do have to step in and intervene with everything. And it's like, it's so wild because it's such a slow, gradual fade where that their need of you for survival goes away so slowly. And you're as you're going to find out, like you're going through life and you're trying to do all the things. So all of a sudden you realize, you're like, wait a minute, they don't need this anymore. And it usually comes in the form of like a pushback, right? And it's jarring because you still remember, like you
couldn't hold your head up.
Yeah, you couldn't. I was worried about you rolling on your stomach and suffocating when you were like a week old, right? We remember that, but they don't. So it's a very wild transition then to be like watching them literally leave. And I just always remember what my mom always would say. She said the two most important gifts you can give your kids, one is roots and the other is wings.
Wings takes a lot of courage, I imagine.
Yeah, and that's not something you build on the way down. When they jump out of the plane of the nest, or they jump out of the nest, that's something that you're constructing moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day, as they're growing up. My wife and I always try to have the mentality of we're not raising kids, we're raising adults.
So it's very hard. I haven't been there yet, but I know it's very hard for a parent to see their child as an adult. it's almost as equally hard because I remember getting to a place where I was an adult and I could look at my mother and see her child there, particularly in the face of trauma and other just hardship.
Yeah.
Two questions. Do you remember when you first saw your parents in that way? And two, have your children seen you that way yet? I guess only one of them is getting close enough to the age where that might be possible. Do you think that they've seen you as that place? Maybe it's not a healthy thing. I don't know. This has just been my experience.
No. Yeah, it wasn't until probably somewhat recently that I was able to see my parents, and I think that's because I was, when I was younger, like there was so much just anger, and I wasn't able to see them clearly because I wouldn't allow myself to be seen. So like I just wasn't even looking. And then when our relationship started getting, when I started getting whole, we already had kids. So then it's like I was just focusing on my kids so much. And then when our kids became older and, I was able to really see my parents, more for who they truly are, like you were saying. And if anything, it really just increased my empathy. They're human too. They've gone through their own stuff, some of which I'll never know. I don't need to know it, but being able to see that is different. And yeah, I don't know if my kids have seen, like I've always been tried to be very open with them, not about all the details, but like let them know like, hey, I'm on a deadline, or hey, I'm struggling, or hey, I'm really excited about this, just so it's modeled for them that it's okay to show emotion and it's okay to have some closeness and be human.
Have you ever experienced, how do I say this? When with your child, you're holding this baby this close from your face, and you see every detail of their face. And as they get older, again, 6 months of experience here, but as they get older, you notice these changes. We walk through life every single day, passing people on the street, and you see them, and you think like, oh, you see them, but to actually get up and close, just visually, physically, to see the details on their face, the age, and the whatever, is like almost directly proportionate to like your ability to see into them, what's going on in here and up here. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but like whenever you have a deep conversation with someone, your ability to kind of just visually see them, at least for me, seems to grow to where you can see more of what's going on underneath on the surface, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have a question tied to this other than like, have you seen that? Because it's been amazing to me. I went through a retreat where I spent 3 days getting to know this group of people, and you hear the most just heart-wrenching but beautiful stories at the same time of what people gone through. And then I've seen them as a different person, like physically. It's the craziest thing. It's like there's more detail there. I don't know why I'm struggling to like put this together, but have you ever experienced something like that?
I think originally you asked that like maybe I interpret it wrong with like seeing our kids like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's almost like the reverse. It's like you see them grown. It's like, that's not who I remember.
Mm.
And I mean, you, again, logically, it's like, yes, I know that's you, but this is how I remember you because when they're younger, you're so involved in their life. So like, that's kind of what gets imprinted because you just have so many more memories. Well, it's like my 18-year-old daughter, like, even though she lived at home until like she went to college, like, I didn't really see her that much, right? Like she would leave for school, she'd grab her coffee and take the car and be gone while I was getting like her brother and sister ready. And then like she would work or have church and she would get home and I had a early flight out the next morning. It's like I wouldn't see her for like 3 days. As opposed to like when they're young, it's like all hands on deck.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's kind of the backwards of that. It's like, even though you try to remain close, like part of the natural, I think, healthy growing up processes, they do want to push away because they're not meant to just stay in the nest.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not serving them. So in order to do that, they kind of do have to become their own person, which, that's kind of the burden of being a parent. But when you're able to watch them leave and be like, okay, they're going to be able to figure it out. That's pretty awesome. Like you're kind of working yourself out of a job, which is actually the job of every leader.
Yeah. And yeah, there's a lot of self-denial that comes with that. And like, yeah, you said courage to step out and realize, oh, I'm not needed anymore. Final question for you. And I do want to have you on again, especially since I totally botched the first 20 minutes of us talking and didn't even get that recorded. But a lot of people who listen to my podcast are involved in the world of triathlon or just endurance sport. And I'm learning actually a lot of people that listen are actually professionals themselves, learning about the stories that are within these different sport realms. A lot of these people who I've talked with, they range from very young, like 15, 16 now, going into college. I'm a D1 athlete to I'm in my 30, my 30s, late 30s, or about to exit sport, wrestling with like, this has been my identity for so long. How in the world do I figure out what's next and who I am and what can be carried over, what cannot be? What advice would you give to somebody who is a professional athlete who is trying to separate and figure out who am I really and how do I go to the next thing without like totally just feeling like like my identity is just so tied to this thing? Like, how do I separate it and start to move into a different realm?
Yeah, one of the things I want to leave your listeners with is being curious and separating the data from the drama. Right? And by that I mean the drama are the stories we put on things, and that's part of being human. We take our past experiences, the lens we look at things through, and we're going to create a story because our brain hates open loops.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to create a story like, this is my identity. Who am I without wrestling? No one's going to care about me. This is the only reason why people cared about me. That's all the drama. Those are all the stories that we're putting together. And the important part is to recognize what's the story and then what's the data, what's the truth. It's like, okay, my wrestling career is over. What are the things I've learned? I've learned tenacity. I've learned how to be coached. I've learned how to mentor people. Like taking the time and really sitting down and separating out, like, what are the stories that we're telling ourselves? And like, just write it down ugly, right? That's what my mentors, Rory Vaden, always says. He's like, dude, just say it ugly. Quit thinking about it so much. Just say it ugly and we'll pretty it up later. Get it out of your head. Get these stories out. Because I guarantee if you look at these stories, if you write them down on a piece of paper, you can be like, well, that's total BS. Like, that's not true. And it's like, okay, what is true? What have I learned being an athlete? And if the knee-jerk reaction is, I don't know, that's okay. All that means is you just haven't spent enough time being aware and being curious about what have I learned. And the way to counter that is to just start asking yourself that question. What have I learned? Because what that does is in your brain, neurologically, it's going to activate your reticular activation system, which is that part of our brain that is always running in the background. It's like if you decide, like, I don't know, we were talking about guitars earlier. You said you want to get a Martin brand guitar.
Mm-hmm.
When you start getting serious about that, or maybe you already are, guess what magazine articles you're probably going to see? Or like when you're watching YouTube and like watching someone play, be like, I didn't know Chris Stapleton's backup guitar player played a Martin. It's not because there's suddenly more Martin guitars out in the world. It's because the reticular activation system, your brain is always looking for it. So if there's something important that you're trying to get to be aware of in your life, like, what have I learned being a professional athlete? I don't feel like nothing's come to mind. No worries. That just means you need to ask that question more and get your brain fired up in the background.
Matthew 7:7, seek and ye shall find, right?
There you go.
Yeah, knock on the door will be open to you. Yeah, beautifully said. There's so many other questions I do want to ask, and I would love to have you on again. I apologize again. I got to kind of cut it in here, but yeah,
no worries.
Really, really great getting to hear your story a little bit. And thanks for allowing me selfishly to ask for some wisdom, and you pass on some life lessons. And I think I'm going to go finally take the Enneagram. Most of the time, honestly, I've been like, that's whatever. But now, like after our conversation, I'm like, I want to get my quadrant set up.
That's right, man.
Yeah. But thank you so much, John. I really appreciate your time.
Brother, you too. Bye.
Thank you so much to John for jumping on the pod and giving me the opportunity to talk to him, hear his story, and yeah, just learn a thing or 10 about how to be a better dad, husband, leader, all the things. So yeah, I am late for something, so I got to jump pretty quick, but just want to say to you guys, I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening to the pod. If you ever have any thoughts or comments, whatever, drop them in one of the platforms so I can hear from you, or send me a message. Sign up for the newsletter if you want to hear about some of the takeaways that I have from the past couple of weeks of episodes. All right. Thank you guys. See you in the next one. Peace.